Welcome to the Your Leadership Legacy podcast. My name is Paulus-Krause, and I'm so excited to bring you this next podcast dedicated to you high performers out there who want to reinvent yourself, reinvent your business, maybe your career, all of it. This podcast is all about being dedicated to transformation and being the best possible leader of yourself and others that you can be in order to create a legacy that lives on. Welcome to Your Leadership Legacy. My name is Tina Paulus-Krause. I am the founder and CEO of True You Teams. And here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Your Leadership Legacy. My name is Tina Paulus-Krause, and I am so excited today because I literally have one of my nearest and dearest, bestest friends in the whole wide world on today. I admire her so much. We've grown up in this journey together and this transformation and everything else together. So, Keri, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Tina. Truly one of my soul sisters. So many people say that, but it's like we are so connected on this journey that it's beautiful and so awesome in what you're creating. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So this series is called Your Leadership Legacy. And so I wanted to bring you on because I've watched your journey. I've been a part of your journey 2015 is when we started this. And so I want you to give the people that are listening just a little bit of background about you and your story so they can kind of get to know you a little bit better.
Awesome. You bet. So I really started out from a work standpoint. I really started out in healthcare. I knew that I either wanted to help people or help animals, and I made a choice to help people. And so I went into healthcare because I had such a heart of service and always have. And so I started in the clinical side, and I was a respiratory therapist. And so I worked in hospitals and did what we do and started climbing the corporate ladder. Got handed leadership before I thought I was ready. So often it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in the fire of leadership. How do I do this? And figuring it out. And just over the course of time, ran several different departments and started figuring out what I was really good at from a leadership standpoint and what the pieces of it that I loved. And there was pieces I loved, and then there was pieces I hated. And so I just really started creating and developing my own style of leadership and what really worked. And then one day I made a decision. I was at the top of my game. I was really, getting model leader awards, all of those things. And all of a sudden I made a decision that wasn't in congruence with some hospital policies. And the next day I didn't have a job. And it was one of those moments that was such a wake-up call for me. And some of you listening may have experienced something similar or have lost a job for any reason. And it shakes you to your core no matter what. And luckily, I had started doing some personal development, so I was absolutely able to embrace it for what it was. But at the same time, what had happened and what I realized was my entire life had been poured into my work. Like my entire life had been poured into my work. And so underneath the surface, my marriage had fallen apart. I wasn't feeling like a good mom. I wasn't taking care of myself. So it was like, that was the one thing I had left that I was holding on to, being like, this is what I'm good at. This is who I am. And I started defining myself for that. So when that was like stripped away, all of a sudden it was like, who the heck am I? And interestingly enough, it was one of the greatest gifts I was ever given, because it was a wake-up call for me to say, who am I? What do I want to be? What do I want to create in this world? What kind of legacy is it that I want to live? And that's when I really started figuring it out. I was like, this isn't the mom that I want to be for my kids. This isn't the way I want to show up in relationships with other people and myself. And so I really started taking a hard look at that. And over the next few months, I started my business. I was actually hired back into the same organization because we created a win-win. And I really started charting the path and trying to figure it out. And then a year ago on March 30th, which is coming up here pretty soon, was when I pulled the plug and I said, I'm walking away and I'm going after my dreams and doing it full time. And so here I am as a transformational coach for women, helping them live fulfilling lives in every area of their life and making their dreams come true and their legacies left.
Yeah, which is so amazing to me, Keri. I mean, I've watched you manifest this. I've watched you create this. And, I've watched the good times and the hard times and kind of all of that. So in those moments, I want to go back to when you were working and like when you were really in that moment of trying to figure it out. You mentioned that, you kind of just sat and thought and had to really try and kind of figure it out. What were some of the things that what are some of the tools and resources that helped you really start to understand, hey, I need to make a big change in my life?
Yeah, I tell this story all the time, but I was actually like in the moment. It was before I get into the tools, but in the moment, it was a couple of weeks after I had lost my job and I was just kind of in this world, like spinning in this whirlwind. And I was standing on the intersection of 34th Street in New York City, and I was staring at the Macy's window at Christmas time. I mean, it was just such a true, magical moment of I was in the intersection of my life and I knew that I got to make a choice. And I stood there and I stared at the window that had believe written on it, and it had a small child painted on the window that was in all its wonder and all of its imagination. And it just took me back to when we're a little kid and we believe anything's possible and we believe we can create anything. And I stood there and I stared at that and I was like, do you want to go back into recreating the life that you've been living this entire time? Or since that didn't work, maybe you could try something new. And so often we just go back in because that's what we know and that's what we're good at. And so one of the tools, I remember the day I was listening to this book. One of my absolute favorite books is called The Big Leap. And I was on the treadmill and I was just like infusing my mind with personal development and really getting around other people that were living a life like I wanted to live. Like that was one of my greatest tools, was surround yourself with people that are living a life, not the people that are telling you can't, or that's a dream or fantasy, right, or a pipe dream or whatever. And I was on the treadmill. And they talk about the difference between, and I can't think of it right now, but your zone of competence essentially. And doing and living that is 90%, 99% is, it's hard. It is hard. And I had this moment of realization of like, oh my gosh, like that's where I've been living this whole time. That's why it's felt like hard. That's why I've kept myself here. And the zone of genius is when you truly step into what your gifts are and life becomes easier. You make 3 times more money, I think it says in the book, with 2 times less actual time spent, and you enjoy it. Like you could do your work all day long and be fulfilled, and you're filled up rather than on empty and in reserve all the time. And right. So that was one of my favorite books. And I literally jumped off the treadmill with this like, oh my gosh, I've been choosing hard. I've been choosing hard. And, we just don't know better. Oprah says, when you know better, you do better. And I truly believe that. So one of my tools was going to events, surrounding myself with people that had the energy that I wanted, that were creating it in their life, that were telling me the real stuff. Like, here's what's going to be a struggle. Here's, what you get to go through. How do you manage your mind? And then flooding myself with personal development, flooding myself with books. I just literally dove in and started consuming so that I could shift my mind. And honestly, that's where I started, because I was like, I don't have those tools right now. So.
Right. And a lot of the times people don't, for me, I didn't even realize that those tools existed, right? It was like this whole, I think you mentioned a wake-up call. It was this whole wake-up call. So my question to you is, why do you think people make it so hard? Because the reason I'm asking this is because you mentioned, like, there's this line between work and play that when you're in your zone of genius, like that line doesn't exist, because it's work and play and it's all just beautiful in what you're creating. So if we know that happens on the other end of it, why do people dig in their heels so bad?
I love this question. And I want to speak into what you just said real quick about work and play, because I remember having a moment not very long ago, and I was actually talking to a girl on the plane the other day. And I said, you know how you go to book a ticket and you have to check the box? and it's either business or pleasure, I don't know what box to check anymore. Yeah. I have no clue, because it doesn't matter if I'm going for business or pleasure. Like, it's all the same now. It's all like integrated. And I was like, it's such a cool feeling when you step into a life that feels like that. So I know that it's totally possible. But in order to answer your question, I've got a dog. Can you hear that? I've got a dog that's like scratching the door. So I can let him out real quick.
Okay.
I know that can be annoying. So, so we're going to travel for just a second.
Got it. We're here. We'll like hit pause.
I know. So we're in, you're in Wisconsin, but we're in Missouri, and it's just as cold and snowy. So I'm not really sure why he went out in the first place, but, he's looking for something. So, okay.
Awesome.
So back to your question of, actually restate your question after all that.
So it was, why do people, if we know this, like I've been in enough, classes and workshops and all this kind of stuff, retreats and stuff like that with you and a lot of them, to know that, like, you see people go through it, you see people get that wake up call, you see them move in that direction. But I see way many more people ignore it and choose not to see it and kind of stay stuck. And so my question was, why do you think people stay stuck?
Yeah. And you were talking about why we choose hard. And honestly, it's what we've been taught. And, our parents don't necessarily know any different unless they chose to live a different life. And for most of us, it's the culture we're surrounded by. It's what our parents know. They have our best interests at heart. And I think it's so fascinating. And I have to walk that fine line, because my kids, like raising my kids right now, if you think about it, how often are we like telling them, like, you can be anything? And then they tell you what they want to be. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, you're not going to make that much money doing that. Or, oh, you're not going to be very successful in that. Oh, that's going to be a really rough go if that's the way you choose to do it. So how quickly do we squash all of that in society and as a parent because we only see what's possible based off of our past experiences, and everybody wants to keep us safe. I was talking to my sister-in-law this morning on the phone, and, we were talking about different things that I was up to. And her comment was that, oh, well, my life's not that exciting right now. And I was like, everybody has their level of excitement and what they're wanting to create. But it was just interesting, because she said, a lot of times I don't want excitement in my life. Like, a lot of times we think, oh my gosh, like, I don't think I can do that, or I don't think I can go there. So we hold ourselves back and think, like, that's only for other people, or I can't handle it, or I wouldn't be successful. So we just talk ourselves out of it. And right. So we choose routes that we feel like is what we're supposed to do, is what the 90% does, that we see that we're surrounded with on a regular basis. And funny story, but this is a perfect example. I'm getting back out in the dating world, and I was talking with a guy last night online on one of the apps, and one of his questions was, do you really find that there's as many people that are as driven as you are to create your dreams? And my answer was yes. Like, I am surrounded by them everywhere, but I've created that community. Whereas before I hadn't, and I was a massive introvert, and I kept my head down in the corporate world, as they would say. So just like you, I didn't know that those communities existed, and that there was this ability to create what we wanted. And so we choose what we're surrounded by, and whatever we're surrounded by is what we end up creating. So
right. It's so true. And that falls for social media too, right? Like, it's crazy to me how people say, oh my God, so I'm taking a break from social media, it's so negative and blah, blah. No, it's who you're hanging out with. Like, my social media, my feed is super positive, because that's who I've now surrounded myself with. And so it's so much about that. Yeah. When we talk about, so the whole name of the series, Your Leadership Legacy, the inspiration comes from it that leadership has changed over the years. So how we led in the past maybe isn't going to be how effective leaders lead in the future. So talk to us a little bit about what that means, and why and how leadership has evolved over time.
Yeah, I think the old way of leadership is out the door. And so like when you start looking at and you start studying the top leaders in the industry and those that are really making the mark, they're doing meditation now. They're scheduling in time for creativity. They are getting rid of things that are to-dos that are considered now a waste of their gifts. Like people are starting to really understand that their well-being is actually what's creating the well-being of the companies. And people are starting to realize that we don't have to be in competition with each other anymore, that there's plenty of room for everyone. And how do we collaborate? I got my coaching certification through a women's leadership, and it was all about the holistic approach for women now. And women are starting to combine not only that masculine way of getting stuff done, but bringing the true feminine essence and who we are as women to the table, because it's actually a gift. It's a gift for us to show up, in our power, and also the things that make us a woman. Like we get to own our voice in that way. And at the same time, you're seeing the same thing from men. Men are starting to show like all areas of themselves too, and bringing the whole of them to the table and allowing themselves to take care of themselves as well. And, the nurturing piece and all of that. So I really feel like leadership is changing to where we're looking at the bigger picture of the whole of the human experience, rather than just like, what am I doing to get stuff done and get results? And so
Right.
I feel like that is the vision that's really, really changing.
Yeah, definitely. And even this whole concept of leading from the inside out, I talk a lot about that, our world is moving so fast. I mean, we're in constant change. We're in 24/7 connection. We're always, connected and all that. And if we're not managing that, if we're not taking the time to really take care of ourselves, and lead ourselves first, it makes it really, really hard to lead an effective team. And so here's my question to you right now. If there's leaders that are listening, leaving a leadership legacy doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a title, right? We all lead individually in our lives, personally and professionally. But if there are people out there right now that are leading teams and they're feeling stuck, with their team. Maybe they're having a tough time with their team moving forward. They're not understanding why people aren't getting along in the workforce, all that kind of stuff. What's the one piece of advice that you would give that leader that's feeling super stuck in today's environment because of all these disruptors now that we have in the environment?
Yeah, I would say the biggest shift is, instead of focusing on yourself and what's not working and all of that, because a lot of times we can get in this frustration spin, is how do I focus actually on generosity of my team so that they actually are choosing to be engaged? And one of the things that I did in my leadership career that I really saw engagement, and it helped me and it helped them, was doing what I called coffee talks. And I actually took them out individually outside of the organization, bought them a cup of coffee or a tea or whatever it was, sat down with them and literally just had them tell me where they were, what was working for them, what wasn't working for them, what their dreams were, what their hobbies were, what they were excited about. If they could have any job in the entire organization, what would it be? And it was really just focusing in on what lights them up and really just being generous listeners. And that changed the game for so many of the people that were working for me, because it was like, you belong over here. Or let's now tap into this piece because you have a massive desire. Like, this is the job that you're working in, but this is what your personality and here's what you're excited about. Well, then we need to add this to your role. If it was possible, we started shifting people around. We started like reconstructing job descriptions. We started moving roles around to fit where they wanted to go and what made sense for getting the work done. And then they became more excited about it, or there was a plan, or you just knew that they were really good where they were and everybody was, on target. And so it's such a great opportunity. They felt heard, and it made them want to re-engage. They felt like they had a say in that. And sometimes it's possible, and sometimes it was like, not right now, but we've got it down, and let's work on a plan for that. So
but they felt heard. That was like the big thing, right? So how is that different from how maybe you would have handled that in the past, or how leaders maybe would have handled that in the past?
Well, I think a lot of times we just get into the results, and we focus fully there. And this isn't happening. This is what you need to do different, or this needs to get done. And really just taking space to listen makes such a big difference. I mean, people leave their manager more than they leave anything else. And so I think it's so important when you learn that true listening skill and really starting to engage them. I mean, just like early on in my career, it was not as much as of a give and take. It was just like, this isn't working. This is what I need you to do. You know better. Go do it.
Yeah, it was the fix and do, right?
Yeah.
The fix and do.
Yeah.
So I love how those conversations that you took the time to have really helped that person individually. How did that help the team as a whole?
Yeah, it helps the team for a couple of different reasons. One is that because the individual is feeling more empowered in their own work, then they get along with other team members better. Or because they were wanting to learn something new, they now got paired up with another person, and they got to start learning and building other relationships. But honestly, if they feel heard, then they start relating different in the workplace. Like there's just a piece of them that feels seen. We all want to feel seen. And so there's a piece of them that feels seen. And so they don't feel as threatened, because a lot of times our employees or our teams or those types of things, they're feeling threatened. They're feeling the insecurities that are coming up, and that's coming out in relationships. So when you give them that space, then they don't feel like that as much anymore. And so you just it's like you see them soften.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been my experience of building relationships.
Right. It's so important, because if we're not, like, when we have issues at work, we're taking them home, right? And when we have issues at home, we're bringing them into work. So it's this whole idea of this holistic way to take care of yourself. So if there's a leader out there right now that's listening to this and they're feeling stuck and they don't have anybody in leadership like you that they can really go to and talk to about it, and they're listening to this series and they're really starting to kind of see some of the pieces and some of the things that are coming out, what's the one thing that somebody could do to really just start them moving in this direction?
I think there's just so many resources that are out there that, we talk about podcasts, we talk about books, we talk about all of those things. And I am a full believer in that my car is a rolling university. And so if you've got a specific topic that you're struggling in with your work, there is a podcast or a book that is on that topic. So find someone that is doing it in a way that you would like to represent. So find somebody like a John Maxwell or a Robin Sharma or somebody that is Brendan Burchard, those types of people that are at the top of their game from a leadership standpoint, and use them as if they are your own personal coach. Like, all of them talk about how to create teams, create engagements, to be the best leader, to take care of yourself, those types of things. So find the ones that have the style that you like and literally just put them on play.
Right.
Because you can consume, we all think we don't have time, but we have all these pockets of time that we're using for scrolling the gram instead of feeding our brain with things that can actually make us better. And then the other big thing is apply one thing. So often we want this really big plan, and we listen to all of this stuff and we get overwhelmed, we get consumed, and it's pick one thing and just apply that one thing, start mastering that one thing, and then move on to the next thing. So Keep it simple.
Right. Step by step. Right. So I understand that you have a free gift for our listeners. Would you tell us a little bit about your free gift?
I do. So it is my Pure Purpose series, which is all about discovering your pure purpose. So often in leadership, we can be climbing the corporate ladder and we can feel like there's something more for us, whether it is a different job, whether it's a different role, whatever it is, but we can feel like there's this bigger calling on our life. And how do I make an impact? We yearn to make an impact. So it's how do I discover my pure purpose without knowing or having any clue of where to start? And so it starts walking you through, how do I start uncovering that? Because all of us want to leave that legacy. And so it's a 3-part video series, and it's a great starting place.
That's amazing. I think intentionality is like the big thing, right? It's about being really intentional and being really clear. And so I feel like your program will help people get that clarity, because if we don't really know who we want to be or who we are or how we want to show up in the world, it's a little hard to stay on track with that. So finding that guiding light of who you want to be and getting the clarity of what that means and what your purpose is really the first step. So I love that you did that. How can people find you?
So you can find me on KeriStanley.com. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I would say I'm most active on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Those would be my 2 most active places. And then last but not least, I'm actually getting ready to launch my podcast on March 30th. So there will be a podcast called Grace on Fire. That is all about living this leadership legacy in this world and living your bold, biggest, truest calling.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Keri, I think you're like one of the most amazing people ever. I love you. I love what you're doing in this world. I love that we get to team up on so many things and walk this journey together. You're just one of my all-time favorites. And I thank you so much for being on here and giving giving your wisdom to all the listeners and everything else. It's been amazing. You're amazing.
Oh, and so are you. And thank you so much for your sweet words. And I just love you. I just adore you. And you are the epitome of what we all know that we can create and what we want in our relationships, friendships. We see so many, especially, actually it's women and men. I see it all the time. Like it's one of the most common things when people come to me that is like really struggling with true friendships, and they're out there. They're out there. So you are one of those amazing people for me, and I'm incredibly grateful.
Thank you. I feel the exact same way about you. And yeah, it's hard, especially when you come from corporate. Like those relationships sometimes are not built on super strong foundations, right? And when you really find them, you hold on to them and cherish them. And that's how I feel about you. So thank you so much for being on. That wraps up our time, everyone. Thank you for being here and listening and tuning in. So we will have another interview coming tomorrow. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
My name is Tina Paulus-Krause, and I thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Check out our programs and events at trueyouteams.com. And until next time, make it an amazing day.